If you were born between 1977 and 1985, there is a very good chance you have never truly felt like you belong. Not to Gen X, not to the millennials. You exist somewhere in between. A demographic orphan. A generation without a name for the longest time. And the strange part is, that feeling of not fitting in might actually be the most important thing about you. Because the world needed someone who could stand in the middle. Someone who remembers life before the internet, but also learned to thrive once it arrived. That someone is you. And today, we are going to talk about why that matters more than you have ever been told. But here is the question that almost nobody asks. What does it actually do to a person, psychologically, to grow up in one world and then wake up one day in a completely different one? What happens to your brain when the rules change halfway through the game? Because that is exactly what happened to this group. And the answer might surprise you. Let us start at the very beginning. Picture a childhood with no smartphones, no tablets, no social media. You wake up on a Saturday morning, and the only screen in the house is the television in the living room. And it does not have 100 channels. It has maybe 12. You flip through them with a dial or a clunky remote, and whatever is on is what you watch. There is no streaming, no on-demand anything. You watch what the world gives you, and you learn to be okay with that. Now think about what that teaches a young mind. It teaches patience, real patience, the kind you cannot fake. You learn to wait for things. You wait for your favorite show to come on at its scheduled time. You wait for the mail to arrive. You wait for a friend to call on the rotary phone. And when they do, the whole family knows about it, because the phone is in the kitchen, attached to the wall with a curly cord that stretches just far enough for you to whisper around the corner. You did not Google the answer to a question. You went to the library. You pulled a heavy encyclopedia off the shelf and you flipped through the pages until you found what you were looking for. And sometimes you did not find it, and you had to be okay with not knowing. That was a real thing back then. Not knowing something and just sitting with it, letting the question live in your mind without an immediate answer. This is not just nostalgia. This is architecture. This is the foundation of how your brain learned to process the world. Delayed gratification was not a skill you had to practice. It was simply how life worked. You did not get what you wanted the moment you wanted it. You had to be patient. You had to plan. You had to be present in whatever moment you were in, because there was no other option. And there is something deeply powerful about that. Psychologists have studied the effects of delayed gratification for decades. Children who learn to wait, who learn to sit with discomfort, and not immediately reach for a solution, tend to develop stronger emotional regulation. They become better at handling stress. They become more resilient. And this is exactly what an analog childhood gave to the Xennial generation. A deep, unshakable anchor of patience and presence. But here is where the story takes a turn. Because that patient, grounded child did not stay in that analog world forever. Somewhere around the mid to late 1990s, everything changed. The internet arrived, and it did not tiptoe in quietly. It crashed through the front door and rearranged every piece of furniture in the house. Suddenly, the world was connected in ways that no one had ever imagined. Email replaced letters. Chat rooms replaced phone calls. Search engines replaced encyclopedias. Music went from vinyl to cassette to CD to a tiny file on a computer screen. Maps went from folded paper in the glove compartment to a glowing dot on a phone that told you exactly where you were at every moment. And for the Xennial, this was not something they were born into. It was something they had to learn. They had to adapt. They had to take everything they knew about the world and rebuild it from the ground up. And they did it without a manual, without a guide, without anyone telling them how to feel about watching their entire childhood become obsolete in the span of a few years. Now imagine what that does to a person. You spent your entire childhood learning one set of rules. Be patient. Wait your turn. The world moves slowly, and that is okay. And then, almost overnight, the world started moving at the speed of light. Information was everywhere. Communication was instant. And the slow, steady rhythm of your childhood was replaced by a constant hum of noise and urgency. Most people talk about this transition like it was easy, like everyone just picked up a computer and figured it out. But the truth is, it was disorienting. Not in a dramatic, life-shattering way, but in a quiet, subtle way that most Xennials have never fully put into words. There was a feeling of loss. A sense that the world you grew up in had disappeared, and nobody even noticed it was gone. And at the same time, there was excitement, because the digital world was incredible. It was full of possibility and wonder. You could talk to someone on the other side of the planet. You could find information about anything in seconds. You could reinvent yourself online in ways that were never possible before. So the Xennial brain held two things at once: grief for the old world and excitement for the new one. And it learned to carry both. This is where the psychology gets really interesting, because holding two opposing feelings at the same time is not easy. Most people lean one way or the other. They either romanticize the past or they embrace the future. But the Xennial does both. And that creates a very specific kind of inner tension that shapes how they see the world. Consider a case profile. A woman born in 1980. She grew up playing outside until the streetlights came on. She passed notes in class and made mixtapes for her friends. She remembers the sound of a dial-up modem and the frustration of waiting 3 minutes for a single web page to load. And now, decades later, she manages a social media team for a major company. She spends her days crafting content for platforms that did not exist when she was a child. She is fluent in both worlds, but she does not feel fully at home in either one. This is the Xennial experience in a nutshell: fluency without belonging. The ability to speak both languages, but never feeling like a native speaker of either one. And this feeling is not just personal. It shows up in how Xennials relate to the people around them. Think about it. Gen X, the generation just before them, tends to carry a certain edge, a skepticism, a distrust of institutions and authority that was shaped by the cultural upheaval of the 1970s and 80s. They watched their parents struggle through economic downturns and political scandals, and they responded by pulling back, by becoming self-reliant, by trusting no one but themselves. Millennials, on the other hand, grew up in the digital age from the start. They were the first generation to have the internet as a constant companion. Social media shaped their identities. Online communities gave them a sense of belonging. They learned to share, to collaborate, to build their lives in public. And they tend to be more open, more collaborative, more willing to share their lives with the world. They see technology not as a tool they adopted, but as the air they breathe. The Xennial sits right in the middle of these two very different worldviews. They understand the Gen X skepticism because they lived through the same analog world. But they also understand the millennial optimism because they were young enough to embrace the digital revolution with open arms. They are bilingual in a way that no other generation can claim. But here is the burden that comes with being in the middle. When you can see both sides, people expect you to translate. And that is exactly what Xennials have been doing for years, often without even realizing it. In the workplace, they are the ones who bridge the gap between older managers who are skeptical of new technology and younger employees who cannot imagine life without it. They are the ones who explain to their Gen X boss why social media matters, and then turn around and explain to their millennial colleague why face-to-face meetings still have value. They sit in conference rooms and watch two generations talk past each other, and then they quietly step in and make sense of it all. They are constantly translating between two worlds, two mindsets, two entirely different ways of understanding reality. At family gatherings, they do the same thing. They help their parents set up the new phone. They explain to their younger cousins why some things were actually better before the internet. They carry the stories of one era into another, making sure nothing important gets lost along the way. And that is exhausting, because translation is invisible work. Nobody thanks you for it. Nobody even notices it most of the time. But without it, the whole system breaks down. The Xennial is the glue that holds the generational conversation together, and they rarely get credit for it. This is also why so many Xennials feel a strange kind of social isolation. They scroll through social media and feel like they do not quite fit in. The culture online often feels too performative, too curated, too loud. They remember a time when connection meant sitting in someone's living room and talking for hours. When friendship was built through shared silence and physical presence, not through likes and comments and carefully filtered photos. They remember when you had to actually call someone to make plans, when you had to trust that your friend would show up at the right place at the right time, because there was no way to send a quick text saying you were running late. That trust, that implicit agreement between people, was the foundation of every relationship. And it taught Xennials something about connection that is hard to learn any other way. But at the same time, they cannot fully retreat into the Gen X mindset of detachment and irony, because they know the digital world has value. They have seen it connect people in beautiful ways. They have used it to find communities and opportunities that would have been impossible in the analog world. So they are caught. Too digital for the analog crowd. Too analog for the digital crowd. Always in between. Let us look at a narrative illustration to understand this even deeper. A man born in 1979. He grew up building forts in the woods behind his house. He rode his bike to his friend's house without a helmet and without a phone. His parents did not know exactly where he was for hours at a time, and that was perfectly normal. He learned independence the old-fashioned way, through experience and a little bit of risk. Now he is a father, and he watches his children grow up in a world where every moment is tracked and documented, where playdates are scheduled weeks in advance and supervised by adults with smartphones. He wants to give his kids the same freedom he had, but the world does not work that way anymore. So he compromises. He lets them play in the backyard, but keeps one eye on the window. He gives them a tablet, but sets a timer. He tries to teach them about boredom, about patience, about the joy of having nothing to do. But he wonders if they will ever truly understand what that felt like. And so he feels a tension, a pull between two versions of parenthood that do not quite fit together. This is the Xennial paradox at its core. The desire to honor the past while living fully in the present. And it shows up everywhere, in how they parent, in how they work, in how they love, in how they grieve. It is a constant negotiation between two sets of values, two sets of instincts, two sets of memories. But here is what most people miss, and this is the part that changes everything. That feeling of not fitting in, that sense of being stuck between two worlds. It is not a weakness. It is a superpower. And here is why. The human brain is at its most creative when it holds opposing ideas at the same time. Psychologists call this cognitive flexibility. It is the ability to shift between different mental frameworks, to see a problem from multiple angles, to find connections that other people miss. And this is exactly what the Xennial brain has been trained to do since childhood. Not through a class or a program or an app, but through the simple act of living through a fundamental shift in human civilization and coming out the other side with their identity intact. Think about it. Every day, without even trying, a Xennial moves between analog thinking and digital thinking. They can appreciate the slow, deliberate process of writing a letter and also understand the power of a well-crafted tweet. They can value deep, uninterrupted focus and also navigate the chaos of a world that demands constant multitasking. They hold both worlds inside them, and that gives them a perspective that is incredibly rare. In a world that is becoming more divided every day, the ability to see both sides is not just useful, it is essential. We need people who can bridge the gap, who can translate between different worldviews, who can hold complexity without collapsing into one extreme or the other. And that is exactly what the Xennial does, every single day. So if you are someone who was born in that strange little window between 1977 and 1985, and you have spent your whole life feeling like you do not quite belong, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not lost. You are not confused. You are not a demographic afterthought. You are a bridge, and bridges are the most important structures in the world. Without them, nothing connects. Without them, everything falls apart. Every river needs a bridge. Every divide needs someone willing to stand in the gap and hold both sides together. That is what you do. That is what you have always done, even when you did not have a word for it. The truth is, the world has always needed people who can stand in the middle, people who can look back with gratitude and forward with hope, people who carry the patience of an analog childhood and the adaptability of a digital adulthood, people who know what it feels like to wait for something and also know how to move quickly when the moment demands it. That is you. That has always been you. And the beautiful thing about being a bridge is that you do not have to choose a side. You do not have to be Gen X or millennial. You do not have to pick between the rotary phone and the smartphone. You get to be both. You get to carry the best of both worlds inside you. And that is not a burden. That is a gift. So the next time someone asks you what generation you belong to, and you feel that familiar pause, that little hesitation where you are not quite sure what to say, just smile. Because you know something they do not. You know what it feels like to live in two worlds at once. You know the weight and the wonder of being in between. And you know that the view from the middle is the most complete view there is. There is a certain peace that comes from accepting this, from letting go of the need to belong to one group or the other, and instead embracing the space between, because that space is not empty, it is full. Full of memories and skills and perspectives that no other generation has, full of a quiet strength that comes from having learned to adapt again and again without losing yourself in the process. You are the generation that remembers what it felt like to be bored, truly, deeply bored, with nothing to do and nowhere to go and no device to distract you. And in that boredom, you learn to think, to daydream, to imagine, to create something out of nothing. You stared at the ceiling and invented entire worlds. You sat on the porch and watched the clouds and let your mind wander to places that no algorithm could ever take you. And then, when the digital world arrived and handed you 1,000 tools, you already knew what to build. Because you had spent years thinking about it in the silence, that is the Xennial story. Not a story of confusion or loss, but a story of depth, of range, of a quiet, powerful adaptability that the world desperately needs. You are the last generation that knows what it feels like to be truly unreachable, and the first generation that learned to be constantly connected. You carry both of those experiences in your body, in your memory, in the way you move through the world. And that makes you remarkable. So here is what I want to leave you with today. If you grew up in that in-between space, take a moment to appreciate what that gave you. The patience, the flexibility, the ability to hold two truths at once without breaking. These are not small things. These are the very qualities the world needs most right now. And if this resonated with you, if you felt something stir as you listened, I would love for you to share one of your favorite analog memories. Maybe it is the sound of a cassette tape rewinding. Maybe it is the feel of a paper map spread across the dashboard of a car. Maybe it is the excitement of hearing the words, "You've got mail," for the very first time. Whatever it is,